Hey everyone, my name is Michael King. I'm your host tonight. Welcome to another inspirational interview here on Artful Minds. It's February 25th, 2025, and our inspirational interview tonight is with Marney-Rose Edge. But before we jump in, let me just say a little something about Marnie. Marney-Rose Edge is a Vancouver-based artist known for capturing the fragility and beauty of nature with a romantic touch, working in watercolors, oils, and charcoal across subjects like florals, seascapes, and landscapes. She's a signature member of multiple Canadian art societies. Her work has been widely recognized, including features in International Artist Magazine, Splash, and a prestigious art residency at Chateau Arcavaux last year in 2024. Welcome, Marney-Rose. Thank you very much for doing this interview.
Thank you.
Awesome. And before we get started, just so you know, you can find Marney-Rose on the internet at edgefineart.com and also marneyroseedge.com. Her Instagram handle is edgefineart. And of course, you can find us at Artful Minds, and I'll post that just in the chat. So, Marnie, I am going to share my screen and scroll through a selection of your work, but can you briefly tell us about your painting journey and how it all started when I do that?
Okay, so I started painting with watercolor in 2003, and I decided it was one medium that I really fell in love with. I intended to paint with oils, but that didn't happen for quite a while. And then I got laid off from my job in 2010, so I decided to become a full-time painter, and that's when the journey really began.
Okay, so well, I'm still scrolling through, but why, like you said, you had a love of watercolor, but why were you attracted to watercolor just off the onset?
I took a workshop with a woman called Aletta Pack out of Colorado in 2003, four, somewhere around four, I think. And it was just a beautiful medium. There was just nothing wrong with it. I fell in love with me and I fell in love with it. I didn't create mud. It just was glorious, and you could make it so bold. I thought, I wasn't in love with wishy-washy kind of watercolor. I really wanted bold color.
Yeah, that shows in your work for sure.
Yeah, and because I've always been around color, I was in the print industry for 25 years doing color separations and proofing, and then moved into the high-tech industry, still with color and working with inkjet proofers and color management. So it really, color has been my life.
So you've had the opposite experience of many people when they first encounter watercolors, is that they're just so frustrated with it,
Yeah.
myself included. But I came to it after oils, but you came to it before any other medium, really. So maybe you've got to enjoy it right off the bat, right?
It's way easier if you start with watercolor and go to other mediums than the other way around.
But saying that, didn't you find oils frustrating when you first started them?
Oh, yeah.
Good. Yes.
Yes, I did, because I was used to building layers in watercolor to get to the values I wanted, and I could not mix colors to the value I wanted with oils. That was the biggest struggle.
Yeah, 100%. And that's my biggest frustration, which kind of leads perfect lead in for this next question. Recently, I've been wanting to get into watercolor, and you're helping me guide me through the process of watercolor because I understood it, I guess, in principle, but I didn't really understand it in application. One of the things that I noticed, and I think this is indicative of all mediums, really, you always come across all this information and it keeps on repeating the same thing, same thing, same thing. And you say, okay, I'll keep on using that. But there's one in particular item with watercolors that Joseph Zbuvik came up with, and it's the consistency of the paint, right? So we have your tea, your coffee, your milk, your cream, your heavy cream, and then your butter, which I thought was very helpful in understanding, but it didn't help me worth a damn. And then I found out that although this information is good, it's also a lie because the key piece of information that I was missing, which you brought to attention because I was using a big mop to do all this, was the success of those consistencies are really in the brush you have and how much water it contains. So I've talked too much. Can you explain that more, please?
So, yeah, a mop brush is probably one of the worst to figure out consistencies of paint with, because it is so soft and so full of water that you'll have such a hard time actually getting the paint thicker, especially if you're not aware that you can blot your brush and blot a lot of the water out of it. So in watercolors, I use rounds, and they're large rounds from a size 20 down to a 10 is the smallest I'll use. But they have a belly on them and a long point. So the belly holds the water and it will release it slow because I'm using brushes that are a mixture of squirrel and synthetic. So the synthetic makes it a stronger brush. When you've got a pure synthetic brush, they're very straight. They don't have a belly on them and they release water quickly. So having a mop was like, oh my God, you cannot make anything. You were making tea for most of it.
Yeah, even when I did heavy cream, it just came off as a wash. I could never get anything dark and then let it dry and then come back on it.
Yeah.
Uh,
And the other thing is to work. So I decided when I started that I was going to work on dry paper because the watercolors dry lighter and it was way easier to manage and control the watercolor on dry paper than what it is on wet paper because it gets way out of control. Watercolor just goes where there's water. So having the dry paper and the fact that I can do thicker paints as I go and drop color into color on the wetness of the paper once I've got water down there.
yeah.
It's magical to be able to control it and to do different things.
Yeah, that was the best thing about that epiphany was I could actually start doing things now and try it out as a medium instead of just being frustrated over and over. So I have to thank you for that. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. Now, continuing watercolor, though, I've known, since we've known each other for so long, I know your whole repertoire almost in watercolor, but you paint sometimes substantially large. And so I'm going to share my screen, but can you talk about the challenges when you're going very large? Like some of these are 20 by 28. I think you have a 48 by something in here.
Yeah, this one's a full sheet, so it's 21 or 22 by 30. And this one was the last one I did on 300-pound paper. I paint normally on 140, which is what the next one is. They're also, so the difference in the paper, so I decided I wasn't going to paint on 300-pound paper because it was so expensive. A little bit cheaper and I could do everything that I wanted on 140-pound. These are 140 as well, but you can see how rich you can get the watercolor. This one sold before I even finished it. It was on the easel and somebody popped by a studio.
So you're saying the 140 provides better color than the 300?
I think so because you actually get more pinholing on 300-pound until you break through that sizing.
Interesting.
Yeah. This is 48 by 32. So it was just over 5 foot when it was framed and I varnished it. So it was mounted onto gator board and varnished. I had this and another 48 at the time when I did for a solo show. And it was quite the experience because I had not painted this big before.
No doubt. What was the biggest thing for that larger painting when compared to like a half sheet? What?
Oh, so I didn't actually end up changing the size of my brushes. So I still painted the background with a size 20, believe it or not. I used a roll of paper. So that was really tricky because it felt like you were an octopus having to stretch it out onto the floor. I used books to get it before I could actually put water down on it. Once it was wet, it was okay to be able to staple it onto a board and then go and paint on it after that. So that was probably the biggest challenge. And because the backgrounds had to be done flat, but the flowers I could put it up on an easel and paint upright with it. So pretty much anything that is a full sheet or larger, I'll go on an easel because it is much easier to paint and be able to step back because it's so big. You got to step back.
Interesting. So that's interesting with the backgrounds, which are, like a better word, quite bloomy. How color blooms into each other. You have to leave that flat, which makes total sense because you don't want any vertical, horizontal striations, right?
All the paint would drain off because it's really wet. And each layer had to dry before the next one could go on. But if I put it upright, it would just drain all the paint off. So it had to be done wet. And I ended up painting them on the floor of this studio that I had, which was really small at the time. And it was carpeted. So yeah, it was like, okay, put down a drop cloth and go with it that way. But then when I went upright, it was on a slight angle, but not a 45-degree angle or anything. So I would have toilet paper in one hand and the brush in the other and put it down and watch how much pressure because it would run through and I'd have to mop it up pretty quick. So there were differences in the understanding how much pressure I was putting onto the paper when I slapped down a brush. It was like, oh, can't do that, because I'd have runs going through the actual white of the paper that I'd preserved for the flowers.
So you just didn't use 3 bottles of masking fluid?
No, so I devised that I could mask about a 2-inch band around the entire shape of what I wanted to save. And then I used cling film or saran wrap because it stuck to the masking and it stuck to itself.
Oh,
So
interesting.
area with saran wrap, none of the paint ended up getting into the white area.
Well, that's worth the price of admission right there. Saran wrap sticks to
It sticks to masking fluid
masking.
itself, so you can really, you can make a little watertight area. So just to stop you from, slopping stuff around, because being so big, you're going to drag your brush dripping right across the middle of it to get there, right? And especially
Yeah.
you're not just going in one direction, because sometimes I'd have to go in 2 directions at the same time, depending on where I started and where it finished.
I'm interested though why you didn't feel a need to go to a larger brush.
Oh, I have my favorite brushes. So I had a size 30 Allegro, which is one of Opus's synthetic ones, and it was horrible to work with. So I went back to my size 20, which was big enough, and it actually created more texture with blooms, and I've got more like hydrangea shapes in the background. It ended up being much better because of the blossoms that were created, because I couldn't work fast enough.
Yeah, okay. So a bigger brush would have given you larger shapes and a little more homogeneous look, where
Yeah,
you're able to keep that small
yeah,
detail but no detail look with the number
yeah.
20.
So it was just, how the water or how the paint worked its way in and created, where it pushed up against drier paint, it would create harder edges, but it still can disappear because the next layer on. So the third layer is the one that ends up having more blooms in it anyway, because I use paint mixed up plus my dirty water, which kind of freaked everybody out. The blacker the water, the better it was. But the water had color in it, but it's actually thinner than what it is than when you mix up paint.
Hmm.
So there was a consistency difference. So one would dry a little bit quicker than the other. So I'd put paint down where I want it to go darker, and then I'd use the dirty water just to tone the rest of the image so it wouldn't end up with any hard edges or dry edges.
That's a pretty cool idea. That's
Yeah.
pretty cool. And did you find maybe not that as you worked your way down, because I assume you started top to down, that when you're finished at the bottom, you can go back up and it was dry, or was there still a lot of water saturation even at that size?
Damp. So it would get to that dangerous stage of where you may as well just let it dry and then do another layer if I needed to darken. So if you go back in while it's at that crucial point of just being damp enough, you probably end up with unintentional blossoms because the amount of water in your brush would be out of balance with what's on the paper.
So you're forced to take a break in a sense, which is good probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's when people think that, they create mud, it's usually because they're overworking the pigment and wearing it out, or they're mixing too many colors together and it's creating a muddiness to the paint. But if you let the painting dry, you can fix pretty much anything with watercolor, because you can scrub off, you can add more paint if it's worn out, you can just keep going. But if you keep trying to fix it while it's wet, it's never going to happen. It's going to get worse.
Interesting. So the key to watercolor is
Let it dry.
let it dry and don't fix it when it's wet. Hmm.
Yeah, it's have patience. There is patience that you do need to have. But yeah, if you think that, oh, if I just keep working that like any other paint, it'll get better, but it doesn't, it gets worse.
So good transition into oils now. So your next stage, I think you did acrylics before oils, correct?
I dabbled in, I did really small oils for the daily paintings by Carol Marine. I had acrylics and I would do those as well, just because I had invested in them, because I did trompe l'oeil on furniture pieces before I started painting in watercolor. So I had some, they were gouache or just acrylics that I would have around. So I'm like, okay, well, I didn't really like acrylics. They didn't like me either. They really didn't. They were like, they tried darker. They look so muddy and tired and just they were. It took a long time to become friends with them, which I eventually did. I mastered them and mastered the process with them. That's different to everything else that I do. That really the oils were just, I'll try those because I really wanted to paint in oils originally. I loved oil paintings that from the museums, and John Singer Sargent fell in love with his work, and it's like, you can't. It has to be oils, right? But no, it didn't choose me to start with. Watercolor did. Oils was like a little love affair that I went back and forwards between all the mediums at any point. And finally, with COVID in 2020, I finally put the stake in the ground and took a workshop with Adriano Farinella, painting clouds. Oh, just before that, I decided I was going to paint roses, and the universe provided me with Kathleen Speranza. It was her first workshop out of her home. I signed up for it. I'm going to Boston. And it was the sensitivity of how she painted roses was, took my heart. I absolutely just wanted to see how to paint, and I hadn't painted that much in oils at that point. So it was really wonderful to take the 5 days, paint in oils, and then come back. And I did it 2 years in a row. And then I in 2020, I took the online version of the cloud painting workshop, which actually made more sense on how to handle the paint for the roses. So it all worked out really quite well. So I don't paint landscapes as much, but I love, the sunsets, sunrises, that kind of thing. Green, I have an affliction with. I just can't stand green.
And then nests appeared, and there's a couple at first,
No, nests.
but now they're like everywhere.
2011 was actually the first time I painted a nest, and it was for an art battle.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Quick. So I did a reductive process on a nest in acrylics for that. And then when I moved into Parker in 2014, the first thing I did was I worked in a series of nests, and I still have some of them around. They're in my archive on the Edge Fine Art, so you can see them. They were all in acrylic. They were heavy bodied, fluid, ink. So it was all of them plus the textual mediums as well. And that's when I probably did close to 100 smalls, and then had 12, I think I only did 12 big ones. The biggest was 5 feet by 30 inches vertical. So
yeah, that's pretty big.
Yeah.
And so would you say, so you've had a love for nest for a while now,
Yeah.
but the latest explosion, I think, has come when you move to cold wax and charcoal. And I'm going to show my screen to share. And can you talk about why you got into cold wax for these, and how is the process different than previous?
So how I got into using cold wax, I took a workshop with Nikki Morgan, who was an abstract painter. I just like to explore different things. So in the workshop, it was actually abstract that we were painting, and I had no intention of going bigger or doing anything with it. And then one morning in 2021, I woke up and thought, oh, I can do nests with charcoal. Seriously, it wasn't a fit for me. And hence they were born. So cold wax medium is an oil painter's medium. So I, was integrating it in 2019 into my practice. So I sold one abstract. Nobody really wanted the abstracts because they weren't my market. But I had fun doing them. Cold wax takes away all of the rules with oils. So the cleanup is baby oil, believe it or not, or vegetable oil. You don't have to use solvent at all if you don't want to. There's a little bit of a reductive process that you can use, and I use a spray bottle, but seriously, it's just mixing oil paint in with the cold wax and applying it with nothing but, no brushes allowed. So it was fun. It was messy and it was fun. Really messy. Oh
And
my God.
I'm going to bring up this one again here. And you mentioned it's quite reductive. So you'd slap it on with a palette knife, but it also looks like you remove it with a palette knife or potentially a squeegee or one of those silicone
Yeah,
brushes.
it's all removal. So they're really, it's the surface. They really are more about form and disintegration. And everything from when I started with acrylic nest, if you go through the archive on that series, Nidum, I think they called it, which was Latin finesse, it's all reductive again, and it's all disintegration. The nests are falling apart. They're breaking down. They are the most fragile. So I had done that series, and in 2020, another epiphany happened. I even wrote in my sketchbook for that year that it was astounding. I found my why I paint what I do, and no matter what subject, it all connects with fragility, that roses deteriorate. And I love painting the things that, the deadheads more than the roses. It was like everything disintegrated. So having that form and disintegration is throughout everything that I paint. So doing the nests, they're the epitome of it, right? The flowers and the nests. I mean, even the sunsets or sunrises, it's all fleeting colors that last a few minutes and it's gone. So how fragile. So I talked to a mentor of mine, a dear friend, and I said, but I'm not a fragile person. There's nothing fragile about me at all. And she said, no, but you're romantic. And it's the romantic side that it's vulnerable and it's fragile. And I'm like, oh, okay. Then I was in tears.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Sometimes it takes someone that sees you outside yourself to really point it out. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It is really unbelievable when that happened. It was like, oh my God, I know why I'm doing everything that I'm doing. And the black and white ones came in 2021, which was even after that epiphany of knowing what was going on. So I'm like, okay. And then venturing into oils with the cold wax instead of just straight oils. The roses are just straight oils, but most of because it's such fun.
So that brings up my next question as well, and I'll share my screen. Now, the addition of the oil paint instead of just charcoal and cold wax, how does that change the consistency and use of the cold wax?
It doesn't really. I mean, it's still just whatever it ends up being with the cold wax, because the cold wax medium is really what does it. And the tools that I use, so from this squeegee and stuff like that, and like I said, there's no brushes. It's all scraping off. It's applying and scraping off. It's just a mixture of action between, what needs to be there and what doesn't. And I have to remove it if it doesn't need to be there. So
I guess the beauty of the cold wax too is if you don't like what you did, you just swipe over it and remark, right?
Yeah, that's the whole thing. It's like you can work it for a while until it dries, and then and it's dry.
Then it's more of a carving process, I would assume.
Then the palette knives come out.
Now, with the cold wax, though, do you have to worry about your surface? I mean, it seems like such a versatile medium, flexible, though, in a sense that I can't see it going on canvas well. So you'd have to put it on board, but does the texture of the board matter when you're using cold wax?
No, it's a hard surface is really what they recommend for it. But there's quite a few artists who use canvas. And so I just bought a gallon of cold wax, and it says on there that you can use gel medium with it to stretch it out further for using on canvas.
Oh, interesting. I guess that makes sense because the Galca is a lot more flexible.
Yeah. So cold wax makes everything dry quicker. I can layer up, and like the last colored nest that I did in January, it took 4 days.
That's it.
That's it.
Wow.
Because it makes the drying time of oils way better, way quicker.
Didn't know that. Kind of blew my mind. That's kind of neat.
It is. It's really neat, and it gives texture, and you can collage in it. You can do photo transfer in it. You can do. It is the most versatile for oils. It's kind of like blowing oils out of the water kind of thing into mainstream more for any kind of artist to use, because they would use acrylics instead, and all the mediums that go with it. Well, cold wax kind of does everything that the different acrylic mediums do.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know that. That's pretty fantastic.
It really is. It's an amazing product, and it's been around a long time. It's been around, centuries, but they've reinvented it. And I think the book, Cold Wax Medium book, that was created by Jerry McLaughlin and Rebecca Cowell, 2015, I think 2015 or 2016 is when that was published. And it was way before that. And everyone seems to think it's a new thing, but it's not. I love the matte-ness of what the cold wax does. So you can use it as a finish as well. I've used it as a finish on acrylics, but it kind of gets dirty after a while. So I've removed them again. It's easy to remove. So
Interesting. But I've also known, and I think you've done it. You can use cold wax for finishing gouache and watercolor paintings.
yeah, you can, but I will actually use varnish on the watercolors. I don't tend to use the cold wax medium.
Okay, so hold the front door. I've tried varnishes on gouache experimentally, and it just sucks in. How can that be any different than watercolor? How do you varnish watercolor?
So, well, there's two ways. So you can spray varnish to start with to really provide a layer for the varnish to sit on. If you're going to use, like, I can spray varnish and then use a water-based varnish, and the spray varnish sets up the watercolor. So, or you can use MSA varnish directly, but here's the kicker: you have to let watercolors and acrylics cure 3 weeks before you varnish.
Why? Because there's still residual moisture and it might bloom underneath the
Yep.
varnish?
Yep. So the watercolors will still, once they actually cure with the MSA, you can brush it on and it won't shift the watercolor. I've had it shift the watercolor when I've been a little too fresh on my
That's
watercolor
interesting.
cured long enough. And Golden actually says, for acrylics you should, because again, acrylics have to cure.
Yeah, yeah.
So they say 3 weeks before doing it.
Interesting. Could you hypothetically put cold wax on it and then varnish on top of the cold wax? Is that something you could do?
For the watercolor
Yeah,
or for the acrylic?
for the watercolor, because that paper is so absorbent, right?
Yeah, it is. And, I've tried Gamblin's Gamvar with it. But the problem is, if you have white paper with no paint on it, it accepts the varnish differently. So having the spray varnish on it is like an isolation coat, because it evens out the actual coat of the paint to paper.
That makes sense.
And you can use an isolation coat on acrylics. And then, just to have the varnish do whatever it needs to do. So I've used the polymer water-based varnish of Golden's as well, but I stick to the MSA more than anything. Spray varnishing is the most toxic, but it's usually the quickest to get it done. I'm usually down to the wire when I do these things.
Yeah, it'll dry the fastest and et cetera, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Good tips. Good tips. One of the questions came in is, how does the charcoal integrate with the cold wax in place of the oil paint?
Oh, it was sprinkled on originally and just mixed in with the cold wax. But, you can experiment and figure it out, because it really is, it's a powdered pigment, basically.
So it's just like mixing an oil paint, but with pigment and wax instead.
Yeah.
And you just
Yeah.
use a palette knife. You don't have to worry about a muller or anything like that.
Yeah.
Just dissolves right in. Eh? Do you find there's any granulations like you can get in watercolor sometimes, or?
No.
Wow, that's pretty smooth then.
Cold wax is amazing.
Interesting question. How do you seal a cold wax piece?
So I don't even varnish the colored works, but I do varnish the black and white, and I do it the same way as the watercolor.
So why not varnish the color?
Because it doesn't move, and I'm going to make sure that the black and white doesn't move.
That's the hard questions.
Yeah.
That's when you say it doesn't move. What do you mean by that, though?
Well, it gives people a greater sense of security if they know it's varnished, because so being on a white background, they get dirty. You want to wash them. So it's better for everyone if they're varnished.
Yeah, no doubt. I could see, yeah, definitely someone will come up with a cloth to clean it off, right? Yeah.
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 Whereas if you've got a cold wax painting, the cold wax hardens over time. It takes time because you're usually thicker with it with oil paint. So it takes time to harden. And really, people will take a damp cloth to an oil painting. Well, oil and water don't really mix, so it's not really going to do much, right?
That's true. Yeah. Good question. I think it has to do with the marks you make in your cold wax. They're wondering if you're just using a palette knife and how do you get the marks to look like they're drawn?
Because these are all intuitively painted. And seriously, it's how I draw. So that's what comes out.
Yeah. And you're grabbing other things, just not a palette knife, right? Squeegees,
Yeah,
wedgies, anything that can move the wax and the charcoal, right?
it's any tool. I go to the hardware store, I go to the kitchen store, it's wherever.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't overthink it, I guess, is the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it is when you paint purely intuitively, you're in the right side of your brain. You have no memory of how this is done. It's just, I step back and I get shocked. It's like, holy shit.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I need to stop you though, because this has always driven me crazy. And it's probably my bias, but when you say painting intuitively though, see, I think what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be just trying to mansplain, is when you paint intuitively, you are taking all the knowledge you've learned since you've started painting and applying it unwillingly in a happenstance that works based on your experience, not just flopping around in a waistcoat, throwing paint and palette knives at your
Exactly.
canvas, correct? Okay.
So even in my statement, I say I work on a pristine white surface. No drawing, nothing. It's pristine. And then I'm at it. And it's the best part is that energetic mark making that happens in the first go of putting whatever medium onto a white surface with no drawing.
Yeah.
This is leaping off a cliff every time I do it. And it really is, it's not just my 20 odd years of painting, it's my life and every experience that I've had that goes into that. I never thought I'd be painting nests, florals. I'm a gardener. I plant for what I paint. But these things, I don't know, I can't explain it. They're just something that's very core, right? Honestly, to subconscious.
Interesting. So no sketchbooking, but you must have when you do like a portrait. Do you know that nest is going to go upper right and fall to the left, or at the bottom, or do you have any inclination, or you just do it and it ends up where it ends up?
So the bigger I go, and the biggest one I'm going with is 6 foot by 3. I have to have some inclination or plan for what I'm going to put on there, because is it going to be a single nest? Is it going to be multiple nests? Yeah, I kind of, draw rough. Honestly, my sketchbooks are not pretty. They're not for the public. They are, circles and just spacing and figuring out. But no matter how much I plan, will it happen? I don't know. I try and visualize as much as I can before painting, and then it may not work. It may work, it may not. I don't know, probably 8, 9 nests in the studio that people have been so kind to gift me when they find them.
You're the nest lady.
I have become the nest lady. I even have one out of brambles. It's just a pile of twigs that looks like a nest. I'm like, okay, that'll do. And I use the nests in the studio for perspective to figure out, where I'm going to do. Am I doing it down this way or up this way, or looking at it how? So I use the actual nests. So it's looking at life all the time, right? I love the very simplistic line work. I've always, so even from a kid, I drew line. I didn't really create form so much. It was all line work. And I love to draw in line. I love sketching in line. It's like, that's what really draws me. And the cleanness is kind of like the Asian, like the Japanese, right? Of how they can create such, just out of a line, they can create it. And I think Georgia O'Keeffe, I have an image of hers, and it's a road going up like a little Z on a page. It's a black line, and it is the most powerful line that you could ever imagine as far as what it carries emotionally and the negative space with it, right? It's way more exciting to see that and to be able to simplify it that much. And that's what I want to do.
Yeah, it's hard to do simple, isn't it? With
Oh,
powerful. Yeah.
it is.
So there's something simple, a little more chaotic that I've noticed. And I'm gonna share it. And I guess this is an homage to your abstracts that you started off with, I guess, with the cold wax class. But I've noticed you becoming a little more abstract with your florals and some still life. So here are some I'll scroll through here. And could you just talk about why the need for the shift in the direction for some of these?
Because these are more interesting. So you really, these all started off as well-rendered florals, right? And there's something way more fragile in these and sensitive, and bringing that line work back into it again is just, adding that drawing element without completing the perfection of a beautifully rendered. You must remember this one.
Yeah, now this looks juxtaposed now. You kind of have you have a term for it, not abstract, but something else.
Disrupted.
Disruptive. Yeah, you can start to seeing it emerging to be this.
Right. But
Yeah.
remember when you bought your workshop in my studio and you used my artwork as a critique session and your comment on this was that you didn't know which one was the focal. So I'm like, okay. So this year it got reworked.
Yeah, there's no doubt now.
No doubt.
Yeah, but this is interesting because when you talk about artists, they always say be consistent, be consistent, be consistent. But then you get what wonderful juxtapositions in paintings like this, and
Yeah.
it's not consistent. It's just interesting.
Yeah. So it becomes way more interesting when and it kind of creates an abstraction within the realism. So I always thought I was a realistic painter, right? Until somebody told me, no, you're an impressionistic painter. I'm like, really? Had no clue.
Yeah, so these take it to the other level.
Yeah. So this was done from life. I had the flowers in a vase left over from an event.
Yeah, see, this is so much more interesting to me, but I have a bias.
Well, that's it. So I'm finding this was for a workshop, right? So to teach somebody how to do that. So that's when I started doing more. And they're just fun again, right? They really are. So when you have realism or the more realistic florals, it's like, yeah, they're beautiful, but I want more. So I'm always looking for more. This is partly why I, play with everything that I can find. I'm always looking for more.
Yeah, yeah. And then this destructiveness, I'll share my screen again. This goes recently, he did this portrait, and it takes a portrait
Yeah.
and it makes it so much more interesting, but the focus is still the portrait.
Yeah, you know what it is, but it's like the amount of people who love this, and it's going nowhere because this is a workshop piece that I took from Justin Ogilvie. I wanted to figure out a process for disrupting florals, which is what I got out of the workshop. So I didn't have to completely render the florals first, because all the ones that you showed had all been rendered first, and then I really destroyed them, disrupted them, brought them back in a more sensitive way. So now I can't wait to, start painting florals in that way, because the audience showed me how they found them so much more interesting. There's only one left, and that's in the Federation for the Bloom Show, which is the Magnolia. They've all sold, and they all sold fairly quickly.
Nice. That says something right there. So is your goal then? It's funny that you started with something so complex as a portrait to discover your destructive that you brought into your florals. Now is the goal to start initially destructively with your flowers instead of rendering them first?
I didn't want to have to go through the process of rendering them up to a fully finished flower before I could destroy them. Because it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
I was looking for a shorter process. So that's why the portrait was a shorter process. So yes, I finished that. So the workshop was 2 days and it took one more day after the workshop and it was done.
Interesting. So this might change your work, do you think, entirely or not?
Oh, it's changing all the time. It's getting looser and looser all the time. And the nest taught me that because it's energetic mark making. So it's nothing constrained by a drawing or a photograph or anything. So I can work from photos, but I even find my watercolors are starting to get more loose. Everything is starting to get more loose.
Nice. Freedom.
Well, and it feels like a fun freedom. Yes.
Absolutely. So with all those new happenings, is watercolor still your favorite medium, or have you kind of shifted?
Um, it's it will always have a place in my heart. So, and I love inspiring people to paint with watercolor because I think it gets such a bad rap, and it's a medium that nothing else can replicate. It is so unique. It replicates other mediums. So it can look like oils, it can look like pastel, it can look like watery watercolor, but nothing can replicate it. So always, I think the oils have now become, well, especially with the cold wax, have become more favorite because they're fun.
Yeah, well, I hope so. You just bought a gallon of it.
Well, that's for teaching as well. But the florals that you saw, the disrupted ones, the delicate ones, those are just oils. They're not oils and cold wax, but they're just oils.
Oh, interesting. So we have something to look forward to then when you start throwing the cold wax in there as well, eh?
Yeah, well, and whether or not it just ends up in the background or not, because you can do straight oils with the cold wax, or you can mix them together. So you know there is no limit to what you can do with it, really.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So your imagination is what will curtail you. So it'll be interesting to see how they develop, especially once I get back into them. I'm focused on the solo show, so nests are it for a bit, and then which is in May in Gibson's. And I'll be teaching 2 cold wax workshops there, which is one is abstracted landscapes and one's abstracted still life. They're just one day, middle of the week on a Wednesday. So they're just fun and get messy.
Perfect. Did you ever want to experiment with cold wax? That was your time?
All mediums all year round. So except summer, really. I take summer off from teaching, but
So hard left to another question. And after you were laid off from your position and you started becoming a professional artist, there's probably a little bit of a not shock to it because we all have this idea of being an artist. But the fact that you have to pay rent to a studio means you have to paint. So that means Monday to Friday, possibly a Saturday, you have to go in and paint and you have to show up. So how do you get through that creative necessity to produce when you just want to have a coffee and go for a long walk?
it's called drive. My own inner drive. So this month I've actually had 2 days off. I work 7 days a week. Typically in the last year I might have got one day off except for the residency. It's just how much it needs to get done. Then I focus and get it done. Creativity part is, it's like when I have too much computer work, I have to paint. I have to ditch the computer. It just drives me nuts. I suffered burnout after the big floral show in 2012, and it took probably 6 months to get back into feeling inspired again to paint. And I never want to really feel like that again. So I think that's part of why I am inspired by an awful lot and I experiment with an awful lot. So if I can chop and change, So I master everything that I do, but if I can chop and change between them or I can find other things on the side, one of my mentees is inspiring me to look at abstracted figure with cold wax and oil. And it's like, wow, she wants to do figure. That's her thing. But I'm like, yeah, I think there's always something to learn and there's always something to pass along, right? So that's part of loving to teach, is that I can share a lot of things that I learn or figure out, because everything is problem solving anyway.
Yeah, so I guess, they say successful painting has a lot of variety, variety, variety. And so you overcome boredom and or burnout through variety, variety, variety as well, right?
Yep. And I do take walks in nature and, calm down that way too. But yeah, it's and get out. And I started painting a little bit plein air. I signed up for the plein air event last summer. Shockingly enough, somebody had dropped out and I got in. And I did it with cold wax and oil. I did plein air with cold wax and oil, which I'd never done before. And I'm like, how's this going to work?
Go for broke, eh?
Exactly.
That's fantastic.
So this year I'm going to drag one of my cohorts with me and do the plein air event too.
Nice, nice. So you're gonna deconstruct the landscape, I guess now.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe.
you abstract it out, but there's still nuances with colors and doing all that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Just as a segue, my most favorite color schemes are complementary or double complementary. I really stick to those. I'm not an analogous kind of painter. I just love lots of color. So, but I love harmony and balance as well.
Yeah. All big words.
Yeah.
Yeah, take a lifetime to learn, right? For sure. Now, along with this hard work and large production of paintings, etc., there comes a time where you have to enter competitions, or you want to just put yourself out there a little bit more
Yeah.
to get what
Yep.
we call exposure, I guess.
Yeah.
But we're all at a certain level where we have an understanding where we are and our capabilities are there and we think we're ready. And it isn't necessarily the competition that's going to diss on us. It could just be the juror of the day
Yep.
past us. But how do you handle that rejection after putting so much work into so many pieces and it just gets rejected?
It's like, oh well.
That's a great attitude. Yeah. And then you entered another competition and it gets first place, I guess, right?
Is that it really depends on whether it's a jury or just a single curator too, because you've got more chance of a curator taking personal choice into it, having a bias to whatever they love, right? Whereas with a 3 or 5 man jury, 5 man's even better. Like the SCA, the Society of Canadian Artists, have a 5 man, and their jurying system is like the Olympics. So they take outliers out of it, judge on 3 different criteria, and it's a point system. So you have to reach that point system before you can get in. So, and it's a very hard jury that way.
Yeah, but it also seems very, not necessarily logical, but a lot more meaningful to the end.
It's way more meaningful. It's fair. It's not just on a whim. It is structured. So I got rejected from their online show last year, but I actually ended up becoming an elected member this year. And then, last year, at the end of last year. So now I'm going to enter their show, their open show. It's a crapshoot. Well,
even as an elected member, eh?
Well, that's it. Am I choosing the right piece even? So you always want to choose the best piece you have at that point, because you can do your best and they have to do their best. So yes, Scenes of Canada, I did a little beehive, cold wax and oil. I love it. It's a beautiful little piece. It didn't even get in as a recognized piece into the Federation. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Move along. We'll enter it into something else, or
Yeah.
it'll sell.
Yeah. And I guess that's the beauty of putting yourself out there more and more and more. I mean,
Yeah,
rejection seems like a hard word, but it's just what it is. But the more it happens to you, the less important it becomes. It's like, okay, next time.
it's not personal.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing that you have to get over with that kind of stuff. It isn't personal. It's like, okay, well, you try and you try again, or you put it into just a different type of show.
Yeah. Fantastic. Good advice. Absolutely. And I can't believe how fast this hour has gone. It's just amazing, which is a good sign. But there's two questions I ask everybody, and hopefully your answers are different. And the first one's going to be, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Oh, there are no shortcuts. You got to do the work. The thing is, I shied away from having inventory a lot because it's like I didn't know, I didn't want it because I didn't want to store it. Nothing sells. You don't, yeah, it's a hard job to sell out, right? So you have to get to a certain point where your work is in demand. Well, it can be, but you want, people have to find you to be able to know what you're doing or not, and then they need a choice as well. So once I increased inventory or just kept creating, I end up stockpiling stuff, but the more sells.
Now, I think that's a great piece of advice because we've heard this whole idea of just paint more, go and do it, just paint, just paint. But no one's ever mentioned the whole idea that this will only not only make you better, but it'll create some inventory that you can put into shows, create your own show,
Yep.
and people can get exposure to you more. And they say, "Do you have something like this?" And then you can bring it out. That's a great result to that piece of advice.
Because the more you paint, the better you get. You technically get better with your medium and how fast you paint. Doesn't have to be perfect. You do need volume.
Yeah, that's great advice. I like it. All right, now the second question. What is the top piece of advice you would give others?
Well, draw. Learn how to draw.
Hmm.
Sketch, draw, do the work. Because really, you have to. So a lot of people, they just want to paint. They don't want to learn how to draw. They just want to do whatever. But if you can draw, you are more versatile than the person who doesn't know how to draw. So, and it's all, yeah, there's a level of competition with everything that you do. There's a lot of artists out there. If you can draw, and like my a couple of mentees that I challenged them. So we were watching, I was watching some guy do a free workshop, and he said 5 minutes, do a 5 minute sketch from life 3 times a day. So you have 21 drawings for the week. The thing is, the more you do it, the better you will get to, because it will train, you'll start to train your eye for perspective and proportion for when you draw from life. It's not drawing from a photograph. It's taking, whatever, whether it's a coffee cup or whatever. If you can do that for 5 minutes, we set the timer and then we challenge each other. And I challenge them to do it in ink, and boy, did I get some kickback from that. I'm like, I loved it using a ballpoint pen. Yay.
I think you nailed it. Ink is so important.
Yeah,
There's no going back. You only got one way to go.
that's it. So drawing, it's like, I didn't realize I have got a ton of sketchbooks. They've got life drawing in them, they've got drawings in them, sketches, whatever. I really didn't think I drew that much, but I thought it was all by osmosis, right?
No
But
doubt.
oh my God, I have sketchbooks full of little line drawings, little sketches. I even did some when I was waiting for dinner, when I was eating by myself and stuff like that. But it really does help. There's no substitute for it.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Good advice, especially for a watercolorist.
Yeah, well, for anyone, really.
Yeah, you can't argue with that. That's awesome. Thank you, Marnie.
And it is a learned skill. It is, we're not born with it. I went to school with kids that their parents were artists, and of course, yeah, they drew from the age of 2. It's practice.
Yeah,
And if you
agreed.
get out of practice, you'll lose that skill. So you have to go back into it again. You have to build it back up again.
Yeah,
It really is drawing, honestly. It's the best thing.
perfect. That's a good way to end it. The best thing.
Yeah.
And so if you want to find Marnie on the interwebs, you can find her at edgefineart.com, and you can also find her at marnieroseedge.com.
So the marneyroseedge.com is more for my workshops, and the Edge Fine Art is for my available artwork.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a good distinction to have between the two. So if you're looking for a workshop, marnieroseedge.com. If you want to just Google her artwork, edgefineart.com.
Yeah.
Awesome. And of course, you can find her on Instagram at Edge Fine Art. And you can find Artful Minds on YouTube if you just search for Artful Minds. So thanks very much, Marnie. I really appreciate this interview. It's been a blast. Went by too quick for sure.
It did.
Again, thanks for everyone who attended as well. Thank you very much. Until next time.
Okay.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.